Are you confused about whether you should be bumping your hips or not to bump the hips in the golf swing? You're not alone. In fact, two of the biggest golf channels on YouTube, both packed with great content, are giving completely opposite advice on this topic. They both swear by their philosophy, but which one do you listen to? Today, we're going to break it down for you to try and make it not so confusing. We're going to talk about the biomechanics, the pros and cons, provide you real examples from the best players in the game, both past and current. So let's cut through all the noise and find out what actually works for your swing. Down, let's just look at what Porzak Golf says about the hip bump, specifically at address.
It's not just forward. We're trying to come up with ways to, everybody in front of us gets this down because we always put them in the right spot, but talking it through to the viewers, it's not just a slide to the left. That's not it. That'll actually restrict the movement. It's the hip going forward and slightly back. Watch. Boom. From this angle. And that puts the pelvis in a spot that actually makes it for a cleaner turn. Puts the spine angle perpendicular to the pelvis as well, and really opens it up for a nice turn and really takes all the stress off the lower back.
Okay, let's take a look now and see what Athletic Motion Golf says about the hip bump at address.
Bump your hips forward a little bit. Okay, that's the first hip bump you want to avoid.
Yeah.
That does not do your backswing great. You're going to have to recover from that right off the bat.
So which one of these two do you listen to? Well, it really comes down to what type of swing you have and obviously your range of motion. So let's start off with the hip bump. So what is a hip bump? The hip bump is a small lateral shift of the lead hip towards the target that happens right as you begin the downswing. It's a classic move that has been used by legends like Snead and Ben Hogan. But what makes it so effective? Biomechanically, it works because it creates three things. It improves your weight transfer, it creates ground reaction forces, and it can also enhance your X factor. So let's break those three down. Studies show that 70 to 80% of your weight should shift to your lead leg at impact, and this hip bump initiates the transfer to help you deliver more power into the ball. And when your lead hip bumps, your lead foot presses into the ground, creating vertical force that boosts the club head speed. Research show that higher ground force reactions can increase the swing speed by up to 10%. And lastly, this hip bump stretches the obliques and the core muscles, creating separation between your hips and your shoulders. And this stretch stores extra energy that's unleashed during the impact. Pro players with a high X factor, like Dustin Johnson, can generate clubhead speeds over 120 miles an hour. Are you Dustin Johnson? So think of the hip bump as chain reactions. It's a small move that triggers proper rotation and helps you get into the ideal impact position. But that's one way. Let's talk about the other way. What about pure rotation? This style skips the lateral motion and focuses entirely on rotating from the top of the swing. It's a somewhat modern approach that's favored by players like Rory, McIlroy, and Rahm. And biomechanically, the rotational swing works because it does three things. It maximizes stability, it efficiently generates torque, and it's compact and repeatable. By minimizing lateral motion, the rotational swing keeps your center of mass stable. This leads to more consistent ball striking, and players who focus on rotation tend to have a higher greens and regulation percentage. So think Colin Morikawa, who's consistently above 70% on the PGA Tour. And the rotational swing uses ground forces differently, twisting the feet to create torque. And research shows that golfers who use rotational mechanics generate up to 40% more torque compared to those who rely heavily on the lateral motion. And because there are less moving parts, the rotational swing is easier to repeat under pressure. It's why pros like Tiger Woods and Rahm rely on it for accuracy. So if you prefer a simpler swing that's easy to control, rotation might be right up your avenue. But let's put this up on a graph to make more sense. We'll break it down into 6 areas. So the weight transfer, the hip bump swing pronounces shift from trail to lead side, while the rotational swing offers more of a minimal lateral shift to focus on your balance. Ground force usage, the hip bump swing can create vertical force through the lead foot, while the rotational swing creates rotational torque through both feet. The X factor stretch, which is a separation from your rotation of your hips and your shoulders, is high in the bump swing because it's it stretches the core muscles, where it's moderate in the rotation swing because it relies on efficient sequencing. Speed swing potential increases up to 10% with proper weight shift. With rotational, its torque-based speed can get you up to 40%. And the consistency, the hip bump can be harder to repeat under pressure, and the rotational swing, it's easier to repeat due to fewer moving parts. And let's break it down. Who is this best for? Hip bump is players needing more power and weight shift. Rotational is players preferring stability and precision. Two sides of the same coin. You can see this is not the answer for everybody. You really have to know what type of swing you have based on your setup, based on your ability, based on your rotation, based on your strength, and based on your hand-eye coordination. So to break it down in layman's terms, if you are struggling with power, you tend to hang back on your trail leg, or you want a more dynamic swing, go for a hip bump. If you want to prioritize consistency, have a natural stable lower body, or want a compact swing, go rotation. Remember, there's no right or wrong. It's all about finding what works for you. So let's break it down even further and look at these top 8 professionals from current and past and measure their hip bump and see if you can tell if they're rotational or a hip bumper. Okay, first on the screen we have Tiger Woods. We're going to do this in our favorite Barney purple, and we're going to draw a line straight from that first belt loop down to the ground, and we're going to keep an eye on that belt loop because that's going to be our secret to figure out any weight distribution and hip bump. So we go to the top of the swing, we're going to look at where that first belt loop is, and we're going to draw a line, and we're going to go right down towards impact. So we can see right as he gets down to strike it right there, we can see the belt loop has moved. So it's slightly more bump, but they're about equal distance of each other. And I also want to keep an eye on this because this could be pretty interesting to watch too, is the amount of upper body motion from the center. So we go to the top of the swing, we can see the center of his chest has moved over about the same as his backswing. Now if we go down to impact, we can see right as he strikes the golf ball, we can see that center has moved just a little bit. So look at how much the lower body has moved towards the targets while the upper body hangs back. I really doubt that Slammin' Sammy would have known that he would have got Barney purple on him, but let's take a look at his action. We go to the top of the swing. We see a lot of motion on the way back down into impact. Let's go one frame before we strike it right there. We see very, very little hip bump. Now if we go back to the beginning and we do the same thing with the center of his chest, we'll see the relationship between the two. Top of the swing, and let's go down into impact right there. So the center has moved just a little bit. So this is pretty good. The bottom and the top have moved about the same in the golf swing. So let me know what type of player you think he is. All right, we have Rory McIlroy. So Barney purple, we're going to put it on the left hip, and we're going to watch that first belt buckle loop. It's right about there, and let's go down into impact. We can see right as it gets down into impact, it has moved. There's impact, and we can see it's about equal distance again. Now let's go back to the start of the swing and do the same thing for the upper body, and let's see what we find out. As he gets to the top of the swing, we can see the centerness is right about here. And we get down into impact, and we can see striking it, the centerness has moved. So the relationship is somewhat close comparatively. So if you want to take an extra step to see, we can connect each line with each other and see, do we see much? In terms of the hip bump related to the center of his position, we don't see much difference. So what type of swinger is he? Justin's on the screen next. Here comes Barney purple, and we go to the top of the swing, and we see first belt buckle loop, and let's go straight down into impact, and look at this. We don't see much. Actually, the belt buckle loop is slightly behind impact, and let's look at that in relation to the center of him. As we get to the top of the swing, we can see that centerness has shifted back, and we get down into impact, we strike the ball, and we see that centerness is falling back slightly. So look at these lines. What type of player do you think he is with his hips? We have John Rahm. Now let's take a look at this one. We go Barney purple left side, top of the swing. We don't see much of this lateral shift, and at impact, let's take a look as he strikes the ball. There is almost none there either. So we strike it, we see a very tight motion, and let's do the same thing for the chest and see the difference in the chest. We go to the top of the swing, center of the chest has moved back much more than the hips, and as we strike the ball, the center actually stays right there. So we see which three lines are really, You can see all three lines are pretty close, which again, what type of player is he? DJ, let's look at his hips, and we go to the top of the swing. We see quite a bit of weight distribution, and at impact, we see he has returned to his initial position. Let's go and check the upper body and see the difference with that. Top of the swing, we can see the centeredness has shifted back as we strike into the golf ball. We can see the centeredness is just slightly ahead of where it is. So we can see the relationship between the two again is pretty tight with this. So what type of swinger is he? Now let's go to Colin. So let's put the hip line, Barney Purple, top of the swing. We're going to take a look at how much motion there is. We don't see much going on there. As he strikes the ball, we see that bigger drive left. Now let's just take a look at his relationship of his center of his chest and see if they are the same. We get to the top of the swing, the centeredness is about the same difference. As we strike the golf ball, we see the centeredness has crept over, not as much, but they're pretty close for government work. What type of player is he? And the Hawk himself, let's put that left hip line. We get to the top of the swing, we see that that left hip does move slightly to his trail side as he strikes that golf ball. We see a big lateral shift as we strike it right there. We can see that that lateral shift outweighed his backswing. But let's take a look at the center of his chest. Center, set up. We see the top of the swing. We see the weight distribution. Now as you drive into the golf ball, we also see that center of the chest moves about the same as each other. So what type of player is he? So should you bump your lead hip or just focus on rotation? Both styles have their strengths, and the best players in the world use variations of each. So just experiment with your swing and see which approach feels natural and delivers the best results. And if you found any part of this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you wish to be a part of this community. Don't forget, Sundays, 6 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we go live right here where I diagnose your golf swings for free to help you avoid this YouTube rabbit hole. Unfortunately, I'm part of that rabbit hole. Fairways and greens.